It was Christmas Eve, and the city lights glittered like stars had fallen to the streets. People hurried by with shopping bags and laughter, their faces glowing with the warmth of the season. But for one man, none of that joy seemed to touch him. He sat quietly behind the wheel of his black car, parked at the side of the road, watching people cross the street with families and friends. He used to be one of them. He used to look forward to this night. But not anymore. His name was Daniel, a man everyone in the business world knew as a millionaire, a single father, and someone who had everything a person could want. But no one really knew that behind his calm smile, he carried an emptiness that no success could fill. His wife had passed away 2 years earlier, and since then, Christmas had become the hardest day of the year. Every corner of his big house reminded him of her laughter, the smell of her baking, and the warmth that used to fill the place. This year, his little boy, Liam, was spending Christmas with his grandparents. Daniel had told himself it was for the best. Liam would be surrounded by family, laughter, and love, things he couldn't seem to give anymore. But deep inside, he missed him terribly. The silence in his house was too heavy. He had money. He had everything people dream of, but none of it meant anything when the heart was cold. He looked out through the windshield. Snow had begun to fall, light and soft, covering the streets like a white blanket. He sighed and started the engine. Maybe he could do something useful tonight. Every year he used to donate to charities, but tonight he wanted to do it in person. Maybe in helping others he could feel something again. He drove through the quiet streets, past closed stores and glowing Christmas decorations. He turned a corner near an old cafe that had shut down for the night. That's when he noticed movement near the trash bins by the alley. At first he thought it was a stray animal, but when he slowed down and looked closely, his heart tightened. It wasn't an animal. It was a person, a woman. She was bending down, rummaging through a garbage bag, her thin figure trembling in the cold. Her coat looked worn out, her shoes barely holding together. The snowflakes melted on her messy hair, and her hands shook as she pulled out what looked like an empty sandwich wrapper. She looked around nervously, making sure no one saw her. Daniel's first instinct was to look away. It felt too personal, too painful to witness. But something inside him wouldn't let him drive off. He parked his car and sat there for a moment, watching her. He thought about how his house had a pantry full of food, how his car seat was heated, and how this woman didn't even have gloves. Without thinking much, he opened the car door and stepped out. The cold air hit his face instantly. He took his coat tighter around him and slowly walked toward her. She heard the footsteps and froze, her eyes wide with fear. "I'm not here to bother you," Daniel said softly. "I just wanted to see if you're all right." She didn't answer. Her hands went behind her back, hiding something. He stopped a few feet away, not wanting to scare her. "It's freezing out here. Are you okay?" After a long pause, she whispered, "I'm fine. Please, just go." Her voice was rough, tired, and small. Daniel noticed her lips trembling. "You don't look fine," he said gently. "Let me get you something warm. I have coffee in the car." She hesitated, glancing at him like she was trying to decide whether to trust him. Finally, she nodded very slightly. He turned back to the car and grabbed a cup of hot coffee he'd bought earlier. It was still warm. When he handed it to her, she stared at it like it was something precious. Her fingers brushed against his glove as she took it, and she whispered, "Thank you." For a moment, they just stood there, snow falling softly between them. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She looked down. "Clara." "That's a lovely name," Daniel said. "I'm Daniel." She didn't say anything, just took a sip of the coffee and winced slightly as the warmth hit her cold lips. He noticed her small bag lying beside the trash bin. It looked like everything she owned was in there. "Do you have anywhere to go tonight?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "Shelters are full. I checked earlier. I'll be fine. You'll freeze out here," he said softly. She gave a faint smile, the kind that wasn't really a smile at all. "It's not the first time. I've seen colder nights." Daniel didn't know what to say. He looked around at the quiet street, the dim street lights, the piles of snow gathering at her feet. Something in his chest tightened. "This wasn't right. Come with me," he said finally. "There's a diner a few blocks away. It's open all night. Let's get you something hot to eat." Clara immediately shook her head. "No, please. I don't want pity." "It's not pity," he said, his tone calm and kind. "It's Christmas, and no one should be hungry on Christmas." For a long moment she didn't move. Then slowly she nodded. They walked to his car together. She looked nervous, clutching her bag tightly, ready to run if needed. When they got inside, the warmth of the heater made her eyes close for a second in relief. Daniel noticed how thin her fingers were, how her cheeks had lost color from the cold. He drove quietly through the snowy streets until they reached the small diner glowing with yellow light. The waitress gave them a curious glance but didn't say anything when Daniel asked for 2 hot meals. As soon as the plate arrived, Clara started to eat, her hands shaking slightly. Daniel pretended not to notice. He didn't want her to feel ashamed. Between bites, she finally looked up and said softly, "You didn't have to do this." "I know," he said. "But I wanted to." She studied him for a moment, then asked, "Why?" "People usually look away." He thought about it. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to lose something important." Her eyes softened. "You've lost someone?" He nodded slowly. "My wife. A few years ago." Clara looked down at her plate. "I'm sorry. I lost people too. And when I did, the world stopped caring." That silence between them was heavy but not cold. It was like 2 souls who had been through too much finally recognized each other. After a moment, she said quietly, "You know, people throw away more than food. They throw away others too when they stop shining. I used to think if I worked hard I'd always have a place. But when you fall once, it's like the world forgets you ever stood." Daniel looked at her and those words hit him deep. Maybe she didn't know it, but she had just described exactly how he felt since losing his wife. "You're right," he said quietly. "People forget, but that doesn't mean it's over." She gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe not for you. You still have something to go back to. Me, I don't even know where to start again." Daniel didn't argue. He just sat there watching the snow fall outside the diner window. Christmas songs played softly in the background, and for the first time in years, he felt something other than loneliness. After they finished eating, Daniel looked at her and said, "You can't stay out there tonight. I have a guest house near my home. It's warm and safe. You can stay there until you figure things out." Her eyes widened. "No, I can't. You don't even know me." "That's okay," he said gently. "I know enough. You need help, and I can help." Clara shook her head again, tears forming in her eyes. "People don't just offer things like that anymore." He smiled softly. Maybe it's time they did. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she nodded, her voice breaking a little as she whispered, "Thank you." They left the diner and drove through the quiet streets again. Clara looked out the window, watching the Christmas lights flicker on the trees. For the first time in a long while, she felt warmth, not just from the car, but from the kindness of a stranger who saw her as human again. When they reached Daniel's home, she couldn't believe her eyes. It wasn't a mansion, but it was big and beautiful, glowing softly against the snowy night. He showed her to the guest house, which was cozy, clean, and warm. There was a small fireplace and a bed with soft blankets. "Rest," he said. "You're safe here." Clara stood there, looking around in disbelief. "Why are you doing this?" Daniel paused, then said simply, "Because no one should feel forgotten on Christmas." She wanted to speak, but her voice failed. Instead, she nodded and whispered, "Thank you," before stepping inside. As Daniel walked back to his house, he glanced at the sky. Snowflakes drifted gently down, and for the first time in years, he felt that maybe this Christmas wasn't meant to be about what he lost, but what he could still give. Inside the guest house, Clara sat on the bed, her hands shaking as she touched the warm blanket. She closed her eyes and let out a deep breath she didn't know she'd been holding. For the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. And outside, under the quiet winter sky, 2 lonely hearts had unknowingly taken the first step toward healing, one act of kindness at a time. The morning sunlight peeked through the thin curtains of the guest house, casting a golden glow across the room. Clara slowly opened her eyes, unsure for a moment where she was. The soft blanket around her felt unreal, the pillow under her head too comfortable to be true. It took a few seconds for her to remember what had happened the night before. The snow, the diner, and the man who had offered her a warm place to stay. For a long time, she just lay there staring at the ceiling. She had dreamed of mornings like this when she was out on the streets, mornings where she didn't have to wake up cold or afraid. She took a deep breath and sat up. Her stomach still felt warm from the food she had eaten last night. It was the first proper meal she'd had in weeks. She noticed a folded note on the SMA. Old table beside the bed. It read in neat handwriting, "Breakfast is ready in the main house whenever you're up. Take your time." Clara stared at the note for a moment, feeling something heavy build up in her chest. Kindness like this had become so rare in her life that it almost felt strange to receive it. She wanted to be grateful, but also didn't want to get too comfortable. People changed. Kindness faded. She had learned that the hard way. Still, she couldn't ignore the smell of freshly baked bread drifting through the air. Her stomach reminded her she was hungry again. She quickly washed her face in the small bathroom and brushed her tangled hair with her fingers. Then, hesitating for a moment, she opened the door and stepped outside. The snow had stopped during the night. Everything was covered in a thin white layer that sparkled under the soft winter sun. The main house stood quietly, smoke curling from the chimney. She walked slowly toward it, her boots crunching in the snow. When she reached the porch, the front door opened. Daniel stood there wearing a simple sweater and holding a mug of coffee. "Good morning," he said with a gentle smile. "Did you sleep all right?" Clara nodded. "Better than I have in a long time." "Thank you." He stepped aside to let her in. The warmth of the house wrapped around her immediately, the smell of coffee, toast, and something sweet baking in the oven. It felt like stepping into a memory. On the dining table there were eggs, bread, and a pot of jam. Clara hesitated, unsure if she should sit. "Please," Daniel said, noticing her hesitation. "You don't have to ask. You're a guest." She smiled faintly and sat down. He poured her a cup of coffee, and for a moment they just sat in silence, the quiet comfort of the morning filling the space. "You have a beautiful home," she said softly. "Thank you," he replied, "though most days it feels too big. My son usually fills the house with noise, but he's with his grandparents this week." Clara looked up, surprised. "You have a son?" He nodded. 8 years old. His name's Liam. He's everything to me. There was a hint of sadness in his voice that she noticed. "Does he know?" "About his mother?" she asked gently. Daniel nodded again, his eyes soft. "A little. He was very young when she passed. I try to keep her memory alive for him, tell him stories, show him pictures. But some days I think he misses her even more than I do." Clara didn't know what to say. She could see the quiet pain in his eyes, the kind that never fully goes away. After breakfast, Daniel offered her a small tour of the garden. Even in winter, it looked peaceful. Trimmed hedges, a frozen fountain, and a wooden bench under a leafless tree. "Did you plant all this yourself?" she asked. He smiled. "My wife did. She loved gardening. I kept it the way she left it. Makes me feel like she's still here somehow." Clara touched the edge of the bench, running her fingers along the cold wood. "It's beautiful. She must have had a gentle soul." "She did," Daniel said quietly. "You remind me a little of her, actually." Clara looked away quickly, her cheeks warming. "I doubt that. She sounds like she had her life together." "She did," he said, smiling softly. "But she also had a way of seeing people others ignored. She believed that everyone deserved a chance, no matter where they came from. You have that same quiet strength." Clara didn't know how to respond. Compliments were something she hadn't heard in years. They spent the rest of the morning talking. She told him little pieces about her past, how she had once worked as a caregiver at an elderly home, how she loved reading when she could find old books, and how everything changed after the care center closed down. "I tried finding another job," she said quietly. "But once you fall behind on rent, it's hard to get back up. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was on the street. It's strange how fast your life can disappear." Daniel listened without interrupting. His eyes showed sympathy, not pity. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "Most people wouldn't survive what you've been through." Clara gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe, but sometimes surviving isn't living." That line lingered in his mind. He had been surviving too, in his own way, hiding behind work, keeping people at a distance. Maybe he and Clara weren't so different after all. Later that day, Daniel offered to take her to a nearby store to get some clothes and essentials. She refused at first, but he insisted. "You need to feel like yourself again," he said. "It's not charity. It's just kindness." At the store, Clara walked slowly through the aisles, touching the fabric of warm coats and sweaters. She felt out of place, as if she didn't belong there. When she hesitated to pick anything, Daniel said gently, "Choose what makes you comfortable. Don't think about the price." She picked a simple wool coat, a pair of gloves, and some warm socks. When he paid for them, she looked down, embarrassed. "I'll pay you back one day," she whispered. He smiled. "Just promise me you'll stay warm. That's enough." As they walked back to the car, she looked at him quietly. "You're kind, Daniel, too kind. But I can't stay here forever." He glanced at her. "I know, but until you find your feet, you have a place here." No pressure. Back at the house as the evening settled in, Clara helped him prepare dinner. She moved around the kitchen like she had done it 100 times, humming softly while chopping vegetables. Daniel watched her for a while. It had been so long since there was someone else in the kitchen, someone moving with quiet care. When they sat down to eat, he said, "It feels different having company again." "Better, actually." She smiled a bit shyly. "I'm glad. I was starting to forget what it felt like to sit at a table." After dinner, they sat near the fireplace. The soft crackle of burning wood filled the room. Outside, the snow began falling again, thick and gentle. Clara looked into the fire and said softly, "You know, when you found me last night, I didn't believe people like you still existed. Most people pretend they don't see you when you're on the street. Some even cross the road to avoid you." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "I used to be one of those people before my wife passed. Her loss taught me how fragile everything is, how easily we can lose what we love." Clara looked at him, her eyes full of quiet understanding. "Sometimes it takes losing something to really see what matters," she said. He nodded slowly. "You're right." They sat there for a long time without speaking, just listening to the sound of the fire and the wind outside. It wasn't awkward. It felt peaceful. As the clock neared midnight, Daniel stood up. "You should rest. It's been a long day." Clara smiled faintly. "Thank you. For everything. I don't know how to repay you." He looked at her and said softly, "You don't have to. You've already reminded me what kindness feels like." That night, Clara returned to the guest house. She looked around, touched the blanket again, and smiled to herself. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. In the main house, Daniel sat by the fire, staring into the flames. He thought about her words, her strength, her quiet dignity. Something in his heart stirred. Something he hadn't felt in years. Not love, not yet, but a kind of hope. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the world in silence. Inside, two souls who had been lost in different ways were slowly finding their way back. Not to wealth or comfort, but to something deeper. A simple, human connection that both had forgotten how to feel. And for Daniel, that night felt different. The house no longer seemed as empty. For Clara, the world no longer felt as cruel. Both of them had no idea how much their lives were about to change. But for the first time in a long while, neither of them was afraid of what came next. The next morning, Daniel woke up to the smell of something cooking. It was faint but sweet, drifting through the quiet halls of the house. For a moment, he thought it was a dream. That smell, the mix of coffee and baked bread, was something he hadn't woken up to since his wife was alive. He got up and followed the scent, still half unsure of what he would find. When he reached the kitchen, he froze for a second. Clara was there, standing near the counter, wearing an apron far too big for her. She looked focused, stirring something in a bowl, her hair tied loosely behind her. The sunlight from the window fell softly across her face. "Oh, you're up," she said quickly, almost startled. "I hope you don't mind. I thought I'd make breakfast to thank you for everything." Daniel smiled slightly. "Mind? Not at all. I can't remember the last time someone cooked here." She gave a small smile. "I found some ingredients in your pantry. I hope it's okay." "It's just pancakes," he nodded. "That's more than okay." As she poured the batter into the pan, Daniel leaned against the counter, watching her. There was something calming about seeing someone bring life into his home again. For 2 years, the kitchen had been silent. Now it was filled with the sound of sizzling batter and the faint hum of someone softly singing under their breath. When she finished, they sat at the small dining table. She served him a plate with pancakes topped with a few slices of fruit she had found. Daniel took a bite, surprised at how good it was. "These are really good," he said. Clara smiled, a bit shy. "When I was working at the care home, I used to make these for the residents every Sunday morning. They said it made the place feel like home." He nodded slowly. "I can see why. It feels like that now, too." They ate quietly for a while, both lost in thought. It was strange how comfortable the silence between them felt. There was no pressure to talk, yet no awkwardness either. After breakfast, Clara offered to help around the house. Daniel tried to refuse, saying she didn't have to, but she insisted. "It makes me feel useful," she said simply. So he let her. She started by cleaning the kitchen, humming as she worked, and soon the place looked brighter than it had in a long time. That afternoon, Daniel went to his study to check a few emails. He hadn't been this relaxed in years. Every time he passed by the window and saw her outside sweeping the snow off the porch or feeding the birds, he couldn't help but smile. By the time the sun began to set, Clara had finished her work. She stood in the yard looking at the sky turning shades of pink and orange. The air was cold, but she didn't mind. She felt lighter somehow, like she had taken a step away from the darkness that had been following her for months. Daniel came out and handed her a cup of hot chocolate. "You've done enough work for one day," he said. She accepted it with a grateful smile. "I didn't realize how much I missed doing simple things," she said softly. "When you live on the street, every day is about survival. You forget what normal feels like," he nodded. "Sometimes we all forget." They stood in silence for a while, sipping their drinks and watching the snowflakes fall. It was peaceful, and for once both of them felt that peace inside too. Later that evening, Daniel sat by the fireplace reading a book. Clara sat across from him, knitting something with an old ball of yarn she had found in the guest house. It was quiet except for the crackle of the fire. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said, closing his book. She looked up. "Of course. What did you mean last night when you said surviving isn't living?" Clara thought for a moment. "When you're just surviving, you stop hoping. You go through the motions, you breathe, you eat if you're lucky, but you don't dream anymore. You stop believing things can get better. You just exist," he nodded slowly. "I think I understand that more than you know." She looked at him curiously. "You? But you have everything?" Daniel gave a quiet laugh. "That's what everyone thinks. But when my wife died, it felt like the world ended. I buried myself in work, pretended I was fine. But I wasn't, I was just surviving too." Clara watched him with a soft expression. "It's strange, isn't it? How loss can connect two completely different lives." "Yes," he said. "Maybe that's why I stopped last night when I saw you. It felt like the universe reminding me not to close my eyes to people anymore." There was a long pause. The air between them felt heavy but warm, filled with an unspoken understanding. "You've given me something I didn't expect," she said quietly. "Hope. I didn't think people like you would even notice someone like me again." He smiled. "And you've given me something too, reminding me what it feels like to care again." The next day, Daniel had to go into the city for some meetings. Before leaving, he told Clara she could make herself at home, maybe watch TV or read something from the library. She nodded and wished him luck. The day passed quickly, and when Daniel returned in the evening, he found the house glowing softly with light. The smell of dinner filled the air again. Clara had cooked stew and baked bread. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, taking off his coat. "I wanted to," she said simply. "You've done so much for me already." He smiled. "You're making it hard for me to remember what this place used to feel like before." They ate together, laughing a little more than usual. Clara shared a few funny stories from her old job, and Daniel told her about his son's curiosity and the way he used to ask 1,000 questions about everything. "I'd love to meet him someday," Clara said softly. "You will," Daniel said with a small smile. "He's coming back tomorrow. I think you'll like him. He's got more energy than most people I know." That night after dinner, Clara went outside for a walk. The moonlight reflected off the snow, making everything shimmer. She stood near the garden, the one Daniel said his wife had planted, and whispered a quiet thank you to the universe, to fate, maybe even to Daniel, for giving her this small miracle. Inside, Daniel watched her from the window. He didn't know what it was, but something about her presence had changed the house completely. It no longer felt like a place of memories. It felt alive again. When he finally went to bed, he couldn't help but think about how strange life could be. Just a few days ago, he had been ready to spend Christmas alone, closed off from the world. And now a woman he'd found in the cold had somehow brought warmth back into his life. The next morning, Daniel woke up early. His son was coming home, and he felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Clara helped set up the table for breakfast and even wrapped a small gift for the boy, a knitted scarf she had made from the yarn she found. When Liam finally arrived, the house filled with laughter again. Clara stood in the doorway watching as the boy ran into his father's arms. "Dad!" Liam shouted, his eyes bright. Daniel smiled, holding him close. "I missed you, buddy." Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She had forgotten what it looked like to see real love like that. Daniel introduced her gently. "Liam, this is Clara. She's a friend of mine." Liam smiled widely. "Hi, Clara." "Hi there," she said, smiling back. "I have something for you." She handed him the scarf. Liam's eyes widened. "Wow, did you make this?" "I did," she said. "I hope it keeps you warm." He wrapped it around his neck immediately. "It's perfect." "Thank you." The way his eyes shone made her heart ache in the best way. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Not as someone broken, but as someone who could give something meaningful again. The rest of the day was full of laughter. Liam told stories, asked endless questions, and even convinced Clara to play a board game with him. Daniel watched them with quiet happiness. It had been years since the house had felt this alive. When night came, Clara tucked Liam's new scarf neatly on the chair beside him and said goodnight. Daniel stood in the hallway watching her as she walked back to the guest house. "Thank you," he said quietly. She turned to him. "For what?" "For being here," he said simply. "For bringing life back into this house," Clara smiled gently. "You gave me a reason to believe in people again. Maybe that's what Christmas is about, reminding each other that kindness still exists." As she walked away under the soft snow, Daniel felt something stir deep inside his chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Maybe this Christmas wasn't about what was gone anymore. Maybe it was about what was finally beginning again. And as he looked toward the glowing lights of the guest house, he couldn't help but think that sometimes the people who come into our lives by accident are the ones who end up healing us the most. Clara woke up to the sound of quiet laughter coming from the kitchen. For a few seconds she couldn't remember where she was. The soft bed beneath her, the warm air, and the faint smell of pancakes felt like a dream. Then it all came back, the night before, Daniel's kindness, the guest house, and the warm dinner she hadn't expected to have on Christmas Eve. For a long time, she lay still, staring at the sunlight that slipped through the curtains. She hadn't seen morning light like that in months. It didn't sting her eyes or freeze her skin. It just filled the room with a golden calm. She sat up slowly, still wearing the clean clothes Daniel had given her. Her old jacket and torn shoes were folded neatly by the door. She looked at them for a while. It felt strange to see them out of place in such a clean room. For years her life had fit inside a small backpack. Now she was surrounded by comfort she didn't know how to accept. After a few minutes, she gathered her courage and stepped out. The air smelled like coffee and maple syrup. As she walked into the kitchen, she froze. Daniel was standing by the stove flipping pancakes while a little boy sat on a stool nearby, swinging his legs. The boy turned and looked at her with wide, curious eyes. "Good morning," he said cheerfully, his voice full of innocence. Daniel looked up and smiled. "Clara, this is my son, Liam. He came home early this morning to surprise me." Clara's lips parted, but she didn't know what to say. She smiled softly and nodded. "Good morning, Liam," she said quietly. Liam grinned. "Dad said you helped him last night." She shook her head quickly. "No, sweetheart, your dad helped me." Daniel chuckled, handing her a plate. "Breakfast is ready. Please sit with us." Clara hesitated, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't want to be a bother," she said. "You're not," Daniel said gently. "You're a guest, and we don't eat breakfast without our guests." Something in his tone made her heart soften. She took a seat at the table, her movements shy but graceful. Liam passed her the syrup as if they'd known each other for years. The three of them ate together in an easy silence for a few moments. Then Liam began telling her about his favorite Christmas movie, how he'd built a snowman the night before at his grandparents' house, and how he wanted to show her his toys after breakfast. Clara listened and smiled, nodding at every detail. She hadn't felt that kind of simple warmth in a long time. The sound of the boys' laughter, the smell of food, the hum of a home. It was all so ordinary, yet it felt magical. After breakfast, she helped clear the dishes. Daniel tried to stop her, but she insisted. "It's the least I can do," she said with a gentle smile. Later that day, Daniel had to take a few business calls, so Clara stayed with Liam. They sat near the fireplace while she taught him how to make paper birds out of old magazines. Liam's small hands struggled at first, but soon he got the hang of it. When he finally made one on his own, he jumped up with pride, low. "Okay, it flies," he shouted, running around the living room. Clara laughed, clapping her hands. "You did great." Daniel stood quietly by the doorway, watching them. There was something peaceful about the way Clara and his son connected. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel so quiet. It didn't echo with emptiness. Instead, it felt alive again. That evening, when Liam went to bed, Daniel made tea and joined Clara by the window. Snow was falling again, light and soft. The world outside looked untouched, pure. "You know," Daniel said softly, "it's strange. I've had this house for years, and it never felt like home until now." Clara looked at him surprised. "Why do you say that?" "Maybe because for a long time I only filled it with things, not people," he said. "After my wife passed, I stopped inviting anyone in. I didn't want to feel the emptiness again. I thought keeping people out would protect me from more pain." Clara nodded slowly. She understood that kind of pain. "Sometimes we build walls around ourselves," she said, "thinking they'll keep the hurt out. But after a while, they just keep the light from coming in." Daniel looked at her, his eyes thoughtful. "That's exactly it." They sat quietly for a while, sipping their tea. The glow from the fireplace flickered on their faces, soft and calm. The next few days passed gently. Clara stayed in the guest house, helping around the home. She cooked meals, cleaned up, and helped Liam with his small school projects. In return, Daniel treated her with kindness, never once making her feel like she owed him anything. Liam grew fond of her quickly. He would wait outside her door every morning, holding a new paper bird or some little thing he wanted to show her. Sometimes they'd bake cookies together. Sometimes they'd just talk. Clara taught him simple lessons about kindness and gratitude, things she'd learned the hard way. One afternoon, Daniel found the two of them outside, building a small snow fort. Liam was laughing so hard he could barely hold the shovel. Clara's cheeks were red from the cold, but her eyes sparkled. Daniel couldn't help but smile. He hadn't seen his son this happy in years. For the first time since his wife's death, Daniel felt a sense of peace that went deeper than wealth or success. That night, he found himself thinking about Clara's strength. Despite everything she'd gone through, she carried herself with quiet dignity. She never complained, never pitied herself. She had been through darkness, but she hadn't lost her warmth. Later that evening, when Liam went to bed, Daniel and Clara sat again in the living room. The Christmas lights were still glowing softly by the window. "Do you miss your old life?" Daniel asked gently. Clara looked down at her hands. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I miss having a place that feels like mine. I miss feeling useful. But I've also learned that losing everything doesn't mean you lose yourself. It just means you start over differently." Daniel nodded. "That's brave," he said. She smiled faintly. "It's survival. Sometimes you don't have a choice." There was a pause between them, comfortable and calm. Then Daniel said quietly, "I think everyone deserves a second chance. You just needed someone to see you again." Her eyes shimmered, but she quickly blinked the tears away. "And you needed someone to remind you that you still have a heart," she replied softly. They both laughed gently. It wasn't a moment of romance, it was something deeper. Two people who had lost their way, finding comfort and understanding each other. Days turned into a week, and New Year's Eve approached. Clara was starting to look healthier. Her cheeks weren't as pale, and her eyes carried light again. Daniel noticed it, and so did Liam. That morning, Daniel took her aside. "Clara, I was thinking, would you be open to working again?" Her eyes widened. "Working," he nodded. "My company's foundation helps community centers and shelters. We need someone with compassion and real experience. I think you'd be perfect." Clara stared at him, speechless. "You'd do that for me," he smiled. "You've done a lot for us already. This is the least I can do." For a moment she couldn't speak. All she could do was nod, holding back tears. That evening, as fireworks began to light the sky outside, the three of them sat by the fireplace again. Liam leaned on his father's shoulder, half asleep. Clara sat quietly, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. When Daniel looked at her, she met his eyes and whispered, "You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" he asked gently. "Hope," she said. Daniel didn't answer. He just smiled, the kind of smile that came from somewhere deep inside. A smile of gratitude, of healing, of peace. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and silent. as if the world itself was finally at rest. The first morning of the new year was calm. The snow outside had stopped falling and the world looked clean and bright. The sun peeked through the clouds for the first time in days, turning the yard into a field of soft gold. Inside the house, the smell of coffee and baked bread drifted through the air. Clara woke up early, still feeling amazed by how much her life had changed in such a short time. Just a few weeks ago, she was digging through trash cans for food. Now she was waking up in a warm room, surrounded by people who cared about her. It still felt unreal sometimes, like a dream she didn't want to end. She walked into the kitchen to find Daniel already there, reading the newspaper. He smiled when he saw her. "Good morning," he said. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep much," she said softly. "I was thinking about what you told me yesterday, about the job." Daniel folded the paper and leaned back in his chair. "I meant it," he said. "You have the heart for it. The foundation needs someone who really understands what it means to struggle. You'd make a difference." Clara hesitated. "It's been so long since I've worked. I'm not even sure I'd know where to start." Daniel's voice was calm and reassuring. "You'll learn fast. Besides, it's not about being perfect. It's about caring. And I can see that you care more than most people I've met." Before Clara could respond, small footsteps came running into the room. Liam appeared, still in his pajamas, his hair messy from sleep. He threw his arms around her waist. "Happy New Year," he shouted. Clara laughed and hugged him. "Happy New Year, sweetheart." Daniel smiled at the sight. It warmed him every time he saw how much his son adored her. For weeks now, Clara had become part of their small family, though no one had ever said it out loud. After breakfast, Daniel drove her to the foundation's office to meet the staff. The building wasn't fancy, but it was bright and full of energy. There were shelves of food supplies, boxes of donated clothes, and a big banner that read, "Help starts with kindness." Clara looked around quietly, her eyes glistening. It reminded her of the days when she used to work helping others. She could feel something awakening inside her, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Daniel introduced her to the manager, a kind woman with a warm smile. They talked for a while, and by the end of the meeting, Clara had officially been offered a position to help with community outreach. She would be part of a team that helped people find shelter and food, people just like she once was. As they left the office, Clara's hands were shaking slightly. She turned to Daniel with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "You don't have to. You've already given me something I didn't even realize I'd lost." "What's that?" she asked softly. He smiled. "A reason to care again." For a moment, neither of them said anything. They just stood there, surrounded by falling snowflakes, both knowing that something deep had changed in their lives. Over the next few weeks, Clara threw herself into her new job. She worked hard, helping others find food, shelter, and comfort. She listened to their stories, shared her own quietly, and inspired people to believe in themselves again. The staff quickly grew to respect her, not just for her kindness, but for her strength. Every evening when she came home, she'd find Liam waiting for her at the window. He'd wave and run to greet her the moment she walked through the door. They'd spend hours talking about their day or cooking simple meals together. Daniel would join them later, and the three of them would eat around the kitchen table, laughing and sharing stories. Little by little, what had started as an act of kindness turned into something much bigger. Clara wasn't just a guest anymore. She had become part of their lives. The house that once felt cold and empty now buzzed with warmth and laughter. One quiet evening, a few months later, Daniel sat with Clara in the backyard. The spring air was cool and the stars were just beginning to appear. Liam had gone to bed early, tired from playing outside all day. The only sounds were the crickets and the distant hum of the city. "You've done amazing work," Daniel said, breaking the silence. "The people at the foundation can't stop talking about you." Clara smiled, embarrassed. "They're kind. I just try to do my best." "You've helped a lot of people," he said. "But I think the person you've helped most is me." She looked at him surprised. "You?" He nodded slowly. "Before you came along, I thought I had everything. Money, success, a big house. But I was empty inside. I kept myself busy so I wouldn't feel alone. Then you showed up and you reminded me that kindness is what makes life full." Clara looked down, her voice soft. "You saved me that night, Daniel. I was ready to give up. I thought people didn't care anymore. You stopped your car and everything changed. You didn't just give me food and a place to stay, you gave me back my dignity. Daniel's eyes softened. You didn't owe me anything, Clara. You were never less than anyone else. You just needed someone to see you again. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The memories of that cold Christmas Eve came flooding back. The hunger, the shame, the loneliness. And now, sitting under the stars with the man who had changed everything, she realized how far she had come. She turned to him and said quietly, "You didn't just find me that night, Daniel. You found me when I had lost faith in people, and you gave me back hope." Daniel reached over and gently placed his hand on hers. "Maybe we found each other," he said. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was full. The kind of silence that comes when words aren't needed. From that night on, their friendship grew stronger. They didn't rush anything or label what they had. It was something pure, built on respect, kindness, and shared healing. Clara continued her work with the foundation, and every month she'd visit shelters and talk to people who reminded her of herself. She'd sit beside them, listen to their stories, and tell them that life could still change. She didn't speak from pity. She spoke from experience, and when she said things could get better, people believed her, because her eyes told the truth. As months turned into a year, the city's Christmas lights went up again. The season felt different this time. The house was filled with decorations and the smell of cookies baking. Liam hung ornaments on the tree while Clara helped Daniel wrap gifts for the foundation. That evening, Daniel stood by the window, watching the snow fall just like it had the year before. Clara walked up beside him and smiled. "It feels strange, doesn't it?" she said, "how everything can change in a year." Daniel nodded. "Last Christmas I found someone searching through trash. This Christmas I found a friend and a family." Clara's eyes glistened. "And I found a reason to believe again." Just then, Liam ran in holding a small box. "Dad, Clara, I made you something." He opened it to reveal 2 paper birds, the same kind Clara had taught him to make that first week. One had her name on it and the other had Daniel's. "They fly better together," he said proudly. Clara felt a tear roll down her cheek as she hugged the boy. Daniel smiled, his heart full. Outside, the snow kept falling softly, just like the night they first met. But this time, the cold didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful, like the world had finally come full circle. And as they stood there together, watching the snow cover the ground, Clara whispered quietly, "Sometimes, life gives you back everything you lost, just in a different way." Daniel nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "And sometimes," he said, "it gives you even more." The warmth of that moment stayed with them long after the lights were turned off and the house grew quiet. It was the kind of peace that comes when hearts heal and souls find their way home. That night, Daniel thought back to that Christmas Eve when everything began. He realized that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change not 1, but 2 lives forever.